Carlos Correa is still technically unsigned due to issues that the Mets found with his physical, the same issues that the Giants found. But Farhan Zaidi met with the media late last week and basically threw a ton of cold water on the idea that the Giants will ultimately end up back with Carlos Correa. So we'll get into what Farhan Zaidi said and much more next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide episodes actually 3 days a week for now, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on today's show, we're first going to discuss the latest with Carlos Correa. It was really important statements by Farhan Zaidi. It was really interesting that he kind of chose that moment to speak out about Carlos Correa. So obviously this has been a long ongoing process. I think we're now 3 weeks since the postponed press conference, maybe even 4. I think 3. Time is getting all jumbled together here with the holidays and all that. But they were basically announced. It was the same day that they introduced Taylor Rogers, and apparently Michael Conforto's deal is going to become official soon as well. So we'll get him meeting with the media as well. But on that same day, Farhan Zaidi did meet with the media, and he said a lot about what's going on with Correa. So we'll just read some quotes here, courtesy of Maria Guardado of sfgiants.com. Zaidi says, quote, "We've had some conversations since then, since the press conference and him signing with the Mets, but our understanding is they're focused on a deal elsewhere at this point. So I think the chances of a deal with us at this point are pretty unlikely based on their position," end quote. And so I'm just going to break these down one by one. Basically, the chances of a deal with us are pretty unlikely based on their position. That tells me that the Giants simply aren't willing to go for the kind of years that they were initially willing to go to. And obviously something is wrong with that right ankle, but Zaidi's saying they're focused on a deal elsewhere. It has been reported. I've been saying don't necessarily read too much into this reporting that's exclusively coming out of the New York Post, where there's connections to Scott Boras, there's connections to Steve Cohen, the owner of the Mets. They deal with them a lot, and they seem to be close with those. The Post seems to be close with those sources, and so. But reporting has been that Correa and the Mets were mutually optimistic about working out a deal together, and that ultimately something would get done. And that sounds like what Zaidi is confirming, that there is, while there's obviously a holdup and a hangup on this deal that was originally 12 years, $315 for the Mets, for Correa to the Mets, it sounds like there's an issue, but they both intend to work through it. And so Zaidi's basically saying, we just don't see that we're going to be back in the process. And clearly this dramatically altered their perception of Carlos Correa. It's just very unfortunate. It continues to say over my left shoulder here, Carlos Correa nightmare, because they did not expect what they found during this physical. So they were just mere hours away from what they thought was going to be a formality in this physical. And, you check on him, you have previous medical records, and you look at him now and you expect things to be about the same, and then it's done. But something came up that was not what they expected. And that's actually what this next quote says. Because the question, I guess, was about, what was it that you found that you didn't otherwise know? Because this was an old injury. Pete Patella was the Astros general manager when Correa was there. This injury occurred prior to his major league career. So how did you not know about this? And Zaidi's response was, quote, "We would never come to an agreement with a player and then bring up concerns pertaining to something in the electronic medical record. By that point, we've far cleared that hurdle. Anything that comes up would be based on new information that has arisen through the process, end quote, the process of the physical. And so this is what we have been saying the whole time, as soon as this went down, that the only explanation was that they found something that they didn't expect in this physical. And all the initial kind of frenzied response of that the Giants were just getting cold feet, or they were just like focusing on an old injury that they should have known about, never made any sense. And so, yeah, and Zaidi clarified, I mean, it's clear that not everyone was aware of this. I didn't know the specifics of this, that basically there's an electronic medical record you have access to on every free agent as, teams. They can check in on basically all of your past medical history prior to signing you. And that's why the physicals so rarely turn something up, because they know your history on a detailed level. They don't just like have bullet points on it. They have scans and everything. And so, yeah, it's just really, really unfortunate that this happened to the Giants. So Maria Guardado says that Zaidi said the Giants promptly communicated their concerns to Boris when they found these issues, with the two sides speaking on the phone as soon as Boris's plane landed in San Francisco at 5 p.m. Pacific on December 19th, the day of Correa's physical. End quote there. And so the implication is that, all this reporting was that the Giants, like Carlos Correa was dressed for his press conference and all that, and that the Giants basically did this at the very last second. Zaidi is saying that that is flatly wrong and untrue, and that they contacted Scott Boras the moment his plane landed at 5 p.m. the day before the press conference. And so Zaidi said, quote, any suggestion that this was an 11th hour thing is just not accurate. As soon as we had information, we shared it. He also, according to Maria Guardado, emphasized that the entire Giants organization, from ownership to baseball operations, was in, quote, complete alignment, end quote, throughout every step of the process, including the decision to ultimately walk away from what would have been the fourth largest contract in Major League history. Zaidi says, quote, I genuinely believe there was a good faith effort, not just by us, but by Scott and Carlos to get a deal done. Some of the innuendo that maybe Correa preferred to be somewhere else, I think while we were engaged with them, we never got any indication or suggestion that he was anything other than 100% in on the idea of joining our organization. We're grateful for that. It's disappointing, but we're also turning the page and excited about the players we have and the players we'll continue to add. That's got to be our focus now as the calendar turns to 2023, end quote. And so, yeah, I mean, it's sad when you hear something like that, like Correa was 100% in on the idea of joining our organization, but then you hear him say that they were in complete alignment every step of the process, not just from targeting Correa, but throughout the negotiations, when a deal was done, and then ultimately the decision to bring up the concerns that they found during his physical, and then ultimately walk away from the deal that they had, knowing what the backlash was going to be. So that is another part of this that never made sense. I'm sorry, but if you were one of these people who was just immediately going to extreme thinking in that they got cold feet and just decided to walk away from this, it didn't make sense. Why would they self-own themselves like this? The hit from a PR perspective, it's not like you're paying Correa a lot per year. It was a reasonable deal if he was healthy, but obviously he wasn't. And the Mets vindicated that by having the same issues, even though they jumped into a deal of their own, and their owner even spoke about it before it was official. So anyway, it just is abundantly clear that the Giants don't think that they're going to end up with Correa. And Zaidi's talking about, let's focus on the players we have and not the players we didn't get, the players we got and not the players we didn't get, which is a tough pill to swallow, because this was the offseason that they were supposed to go out and land a superstar and a face of the franchise. And again, what's just so sad is that they did, and it was just pending a routine physical, and they just happened to be the one case out of 100 or more where something actually went south during that physical process. So coming up in just a minute, we'll wrap that up and turn our attention to some mailbag questions. How about a specific trade possibility for the Giants to address their just their infield defense in general. So we'll get to that in just a minute. But before we do, this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball. We've got it all at BetOnline.net. And MLB, of course. It's been a lot of fun going through MLB offseason odds. Unfortunately, we were linking the Giants and Judge and Correa and all that, but it looks like ultimately if you took the Giants on any of those, you're going to end up losing those bets, but it was a fun process nonetheless. And coming up shortly, not too long from now, we should have some over-under odds for the San Francisco Giants and other teams that we'll address as the offseason carries on, and much more. So you can check it out. They've got podcasts and everything else at BetOnline, where it's the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline is where the game starts. All right, as promised, we are going to move on. It's tough. I mean, I was holding out hope, not that it ever seemed likely, but as soon as that Mets physical went south as well, it seemed like, it was a possibility that Correa could end up back with the Giants. But Farhan Zaidi basically coming out and saying all this stuff makes it seem like a done deal. It's not going to happen. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Locked On MLB Prospects host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. So yes, the one other thing I wanted to mention about that was that, to me, the timing of it, this is kind of how I started out, was saying it was a little bit, not weird or anything, but it was noteworthy, the timing of when Farhan Zaidi decided to come out and speak for the first time about this Carlos Correa situation. And by the way, when he met with the media, he was very clear that it's been super frustrating for him and for the whole organization because they basically can't say much at all. This is like all they could say. And some might say, why didn't they say this stuff sooner? And my thinking and response to that is because the issue was so serious that they believed that there was a chance the Mets would raise the same concerns and that he would still be unsigned. And so you don't want to come out here saying these like conclusive statements about we lost the player when there was still a possibility that things could fall apart with the Mets as well and they could get back in the running. And that's what Zaidi said. We've had some conversations since then. And I think he means since the Mets deal fell apart. It didn't fall apart, but the Mets deal had a hang up just like the Giants deal did. Which, by the way, now that it's clear that they're committed to working something out with the Mets, why has Correa and Scott Boras given all this leeway to the Mets where the Giants got, a span of less than 24 hours, it seems? Like they said, they raised the concerns at 5 p.m. on a Monday before the Tuesday press conference, and they had until about 1 p.m. on Monday before Scott Boras said, I need to start talking to other teams. And then by the end of Tuesday, Correa and Boras had secured a new deal with the Mets. And so, yeah, it just comes out stinking for the Giants and their fans. Not stinking of foul play or anything like that, but just it's an unfortunate thing, and it hurts nonetheless, and it's disappointing. It's more than disappointing. It's very disappointing that this has all transpired. But the offseason is not over, and there's not really impact free agents left, but there's definitely a whole trade market, and there are some good rental players that perhaps the Giants could target. They could bolster their bullpen, which I still think is an area of need. The catcher position, they could still afford to upgrade, and that middle infield defense. So speaking of, I keep saying middle infield. I guess maybe that's a Freudian slip because that's really what I'm concerned about, but also just infield defense in general. So getting to these mailbag questions, the first one comes from Lane, who says, with the Marlins signing Gene Segura, even with the idea to play third, would J.D. Davis for Joey Wendle work as a way to add a lefty bat capable of backing up all the infield spots and to spell David Villar? Marlins might like the upside of Davis. And so, yes, Joey Wendle is one of the most obvious trade targets for the San Francisco Giants. I liked him, you may recall, as someone to perhaps target at last season's trading deadline. And he didn't end up getting traded at all, Joey Wendle. But he's entering the last year of his contract with the Marlins, so he's set to be a free agent after the 2023 season. He's not a star player. He's like a complimentary player, but his strengths really would make a big difference to the San Francisco Giants because what he is a good defender at all the infield spots. Third, short, second. I mean, I'm sure he could play first as well, but it's mostly those, I don't want to say more important, but more important defensively spots like third, short, and second. And as it is right now, the Giants don't even really have a true backup to Brandon Crawford because Thairo Estrada, yes, could play short, but I don't think the arm is really well equipped for that position. He kind of throws like a sidearm, and I don't love that from the shortstop position where you're making really long throws. And so Joey Wendle being able to play whatever position he's needed and to start a lot and to ride the bench a lot and to be a defensive replacement, to give Crawford days off, it just makes a lot of sense. Whether it's Wendle or somebody else, they need to address this, and I think that they will. I just heard a rumor from, coming out through MLB trade rumors that the Marlins and Red Sox, I think, have discussed Joey Wendle. And so it seems like those discussions are ongoing with the Marlins basically shopping Joey Wendle. It makes so much sense for them to deal him, and the Giants make a lot of sense as a destination. J.D. Davis has a couple of years of team control, and so I might consider that a slight overpay. 2 years of J.D. Davis, who's good in his own way. Defense is not the strength of J.D. Davis, but he's a much better hitter than Joey Wendle, I believe. So it might be fair if J.D. Davis only had 1 year of team control remaining, and then it would be like a slam dunk in terms of fairness to me. But 2 years of J.D. Davis, I don't know. It's not like J.D. Davis necessarily adds a ton of value to the Giants. And so would I put up too much of a fight if that's what it took? No. But I think that ultimately the Giants would probably think that was a little bit of a weak return for J.D. Davis. So yeah, Joey Wendle, not a star. Marlins don't figure to be good. It makes a lot of sense for them to deal him. And J.D. Davis is expendable for the Giants. That's the thing too. That's the other part of this answer, is that with VR and with Flores and with somebody else that I'm blanking on right now because I don't have the team depth chart pulled up in front of me, Flores, J.D. Davis, and VR. Those are the three righties who kind of comprise that corner infield conundrum. And I think that one of them makes a lot of sense to deal away, and to add defense and a lefty bat instead of three righties would make a lot of sense for the Giants. So the next question comes from Jody, who says, you saw a lot of upside on the 2021 team before the season started, setting aside the disappointment of expectation that has been created by the weird events of this offseason and the underwhelming 2022 season. How do you see the 2021 philosophy trajectory overlaid on 2023? So that's a complicated answer. Basically, the way I see it is that it's a lot of a similar way of constructing the roster, that maybe a little more emphasis on going outside the organization to target some like everyday type position players. They tried to get that star. They didn't get him yet. They could trade for someone. You never know. But the difference is that 2021 team had Buster Posey and ultimately went on to have Brandon Crawford have an MVP type season. And Brandon Belt was kind of still good. Buster Posey is the big difference to me, because right now catcher is a big question mark. Like Joey Bart has the pedigree, has perhaps the upside if he can limit his swing and miss and strikeout issues. But to have like a cornerstone anchor position player, superstar, Hall of Fame leader like Buster Posey, and then to suddenly not have that. I mean, it's not suddenly now, we're a couple years into that. It makes a difference. But that being said, the 2021 team won 107 games. And a lot of people say, well, you can't look at that. It wasn't sustainable. Well, it didn't have to be sustainable. If you could win 90 games, that would get you into the playoffs probably. So you know, as magical as it was, it doesn't have to be nearly as magical to still end up with a good season for the Giants. So I don't know. One of the questions, I thought this was it as I was reading it, is like, do you think the 2023 team is actually talent-wise better than the 2021 team? And that's an interesting question. I think it's maybe close because, yeah, you lose Posey, and a lot of people mentioned Chris Bryant, but they didn't have Bryant until August, and he didn't perform very well. He was okay, but not great. So I don't really count Bryant as part of why the 2021 team was so great. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not down on the 2023 Giants. I think they have work to do, but they certainly are a team capable of things coming together and going right and being a playoff team at this point in time. But I think they have some work to do to be like a team that projects as a playoff team. But thankfully, it's only January 3rd. So coming up in just a minute, more questions and answers. We're going to get into, what are we going to get into? We're going to talk about other bullpen options for the San Francisco Giants. I mentioned it was obviously a weakness in 2022, and it's an area where they need to improve still, even after adding Taylor Rogers. So we'll get to that in just a minute. But before we do, this episode is brought to you by Built Bar. Looking for a delicious treat but don't want all of the fat and calories? Then you've got to try Built Bar. They've got unbelievably delicious flavors like churro and peanut butter brownie. And, obviously New Year's is here and we've all got our New Year's resolutions. And mine is, as always, to eat healthy. And you wouldn't believe it, but Built can be a huge part of that resolution, especially because you're satisfying that desire to eat something delicious. That Built absolutely checks that box. But what is so surprising because of that taste is that they also come in with super healthy macros, like only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar with a whopping 17 grams of protein in a typical bar. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today, walk into the pharmacy section, and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs, or you can order Built Bars at Built.com. If you're close to Sam's Club, how about this? Run in and grab a 13-bar box with our hit flavors, brownie batter, and churro. You can thank me later. All right, as promised, we are going to get into more questions and answers, talking about the bullpen and Shohei Ohtani. We've got questions here, so a lot more to get into. Brian says, what are other bullpen options? I heard they were in on Shintaro Fujinami, a Boris client, an option. And yeah, I heard that as well. And he is an interesting guy. He apparently throws like 100-mile-an-hour fastball and has a good splitter. So in that sense, the repertoire reminds you of Kodai Senga, but I guess command has been a problem in recent years for Shintaro Fujinami. So he was posted like a month ago, and I think now the posting rules are that teams have 45 days, and it used to be 30, to try to come to an agreement with the player. Otherwise, they return to the team that posted them. And in Fujinami's case, I guess it's in Japan. But yeah, I mean, he stands out as an option. The free agent options have thinned out quite a bit. I was looking through this in preparation for this question specifically. The best 2 relievers might very well be left-handed relievers. You wouldn't believe this, but Matt Moore stands out as one of the better relievers left. Remember Matt Moore? He was part of the Matt Duffy trade with the Tampa Bay Rays back in 2016. Or was it? Yeah, 2016. And, pitched great kind of down the stretch and in the postseason in that one NLDS start against the Cubs. And he's since had a long career. I mean, he's been around. He's now 30. He's going to be 34 in 2023. And he's become a bullpen arm, and he had a really nice year for the Texas Rangers in 2022. He had a 1.95 ERA, 2.83 expected ERA. Command has still been a problem. I just mentioned that other player has some command issues. I wouldn't expect them to get Matt Moore. Andrew Chafin stands out as somebody who could perhaps be somewhat realistic. Has played in, for the Arizona Diamondbacks. I believe he played for the Oakland A's as well. Yeah, he spent part of 2021 with the Oakland A's. So familiar with the Bay Area, familiar with the NL West, and is a good pitcher and kind of a goofy personality that I think could fit pretty nicely with the Giants. So Chafin stands out as a solid option. I think a righty makes more sense, but when you look through, it's it's kind of a not a who's who. It's the opposite. It's kind of a who's that when you look through. I mean, some of the options like Reyes, Maranta, are not necessarily great options. It's guys that there's not a lot of certainty with what kind of performance you'd be getting. So might have to be a trade. They might just kind of scour through this list of names. There are certainly a lot of them. I count, 50 plus free agent relievers remaining, and they can kind of strategically target the ones that they think offer that kind of upside that they like, but may have to be a trade unless you do go out and add like an Andrew Chafin. I think that would be a really strong add. It would just give you quite a few lefties in that pen, but maybe that's not such a bad thing. I don't know. And then there's also Shintaro Fujinami, who makes some sense, and we'll see. And it's been, we've only got a couple weeks left before he needs to sign, or else he can't be signed. Next question from Bay Area Fam, who says, is trading for Shohei Ohtani the best way to get him? The Giants could use this to make their pitch to sign him. They would show him around the city and their team culture. Yeah, 100%. Trading for him would be the best way to get him long term, is what you mean, I think. So, of course, it would be. But the Angels, I don't think they're going to trade him. When the offseason started, I said I thought they might, because they've had him and Trout, and they still haven't been able to win. But they've spent this offseason adding kind of the necessary, on paper, pieces to complement the superstar talent they have. They've made a lot of mid-tier additions, because their problem is that they're top heavy. They've got their stars, and then they've got just like a bunch of black holes on their roster at various places. But they've tried to address that. And so that signals clearly to me that they're trying to win with Shohei Ohtani, who's only under team control for one more year. They've also flat out said they're not going to trade him. So yes, from the Giants' perspective, it would be the best way to sign him long term would be to trade for him now. But I just doubt that he gets traded at this point. I started off thinking he would, but now I don't think he will. Next question from KM McConnell, who says, are there any other players left in free agency to add on an MLB contract? Elvis Andrus, Adam Duvall, and Jose Iglesias come to mind. If the Giants were to sign one of these players, which would you prefer and why? Yeah, I guess Elvis Andrus could make some sense. Obviously spent some time in Oakland, so familiar with the Bay Area. I've just got to say, I think part of why I wanted to address this question was I think Giants fans need to break up with Adam Duvall. I've also seen like Matt Duffy mentioned as like a reunion target. These players, I'm sorry to say it, have been like overrated by Giants fans since they've gone on to have okay careers. I mean, Duvall has had his moments, but if you look at like the career numbers, he has a sub 300 on base percentage for his career. And he's a free agent right now, and there's a reason you haven't seen a lot of interest. And when he does ultimately sign, it's going to be a very small deal. A career 289 on base percentage, below average weighted runs created plus of 96 in his career. He has been a good defender, but he is 34 years old at this point. And I mean, he's got power. He's a okay, like, complimentary player, but the Giants outfield is pretty full at this point in time. So I don't know that he's going to get a guaranteed MLB contract. If he does, it'll be pretty small. So I don't know. I'm always getting questions for the last 10 years about Giants targeting Adam Duvall. I just had to say, I don't know that makes it hasn't made a lot of sense ever, really. I mean, he's had his moments. He's certainly had his moments. But Elvis Andrus, I mean, he interestingly bounced back quite a bit once he was traded from the A's to the Chicago White Sox last year. And yeah, I mean, he could make some sense. I'm not sure he would want to take on that kind of part-time role, but he is going to be 34 next year. He plays, I think, what is known to be a pretty good defensive shortstop as I scroll through to look at some of the numbers. Actually, no. I mean, he hasn't been a good defensive shortstop by defensive runs saved at all lately. By outs above average, he has. By ultimate zone rating, he kind of has. And so I guess this is one of those cases where the metrics don't necessarily agree, but, you know, could he play second as a backup? I don't know. I like the trade options, Joey Wendle, and we also talked about Ha-Seong Kim, I think, last Friday. I like him a lot as a possible trade candidate. He wouldn't come cheaply, but Ha-Seong Kim, I would be very happy if the Giants were able to get him. I think that the free agents you mentioned here, KM McConnell, I just don't really like any of those three enough to warrant giving them a roster spot. There are some guys out there who could be worth signing still at this point. It would take me too long to go through one by one, but, somebody who comes to mind, Jurickson Profar, is still a pretty solid player, and I don't know. There's a lot of free agents left, and here and there looking through, like Brandon Belt could make sense for the Giants, and on, but none of them are real difference makers, and that's the problem I see. I think addressing the infield defense, however you can do it, but also you can't just have a black hole from an offense perspective. They've got to be able to also hold their own somewhat at the plate, not just defense. I don't think that they clearly don't operate like that. They've had some just defense players like Steven Duggar and Mauricio Dubon, and they haven't liked those guys enough. So you've got to hit as well, somewhat. And that's what I would be looking for in the form of a Joey Wendle or a Ha-Seong Kim. Or be platoonable. You might be poor against one side, but if you can hit the other side, they can leverage that to their advantage. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On MLB Prospects. Host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot, so thank you in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. I can't wait to be with you again 2 more times this week, unless something crazy happens, then maybe more. So thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.